Greetings, everyone. Nathan Nerdarch here from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, hanging out with some nerds.
Nerdarchist Ted.
Nerdarchist Dave.
We're talking the top 10 D&D homebrew tips from Nubz.
With love.
Jump down the description below where you can sign up for Nerdarchy the newsletter, get weekly gaming tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
So, Nigel Sanford Nubz, or is it Nigel Nubz Sanford? However you want to go
Or
with it.
Nubz, also known as Nigel.
Or also Nerdarchist Nubz, did a great article over on nerdarchy.com, and we thought we'd touch on it and give our feedback, and also put a link to in the description below so that you guys can check it out. You may find it very useful, especially if you're doing homebrew. So he's got, the name of the article is Homebrew, What I've Learned. And then he has like a list of 10 things that have been takeaways for him while building homebrew and working with homebrew stuff.
Now, this is not I'm running a homebrew game, but actually creating homebrew classes, archetypes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, everything. It's anything that is not in the books that you make up as the DM and introduce into the game is what he's calling homebrew.
Yeah, and either the idea is you're going to share it with your group directly, or you're going to share it with the wider public of the D&D community.
So we'll go through the list, and then we'll circle back and touch on different things. So his first one is balance, and that's in all things in the game. Not just against the classes and races. So number 2 is focus and theme. Number 3 is stay in your lane, which can be very important. 4 is themes being campaign specific. 5 is playtest. 6 is action economy. 7 is being willing to adjust to your playtest, what you've actually learned. 8 is collaborate. 9 is play against yourself. And 10 is proofread.
All of these things definitely are important when you're trying to prepare something that you might want to put up on, RPG Drive-Thru or the DM's Guild. Some might not be as important if you're just creating something for your table.
Yeah, if you're doing a lot of GM content and you're the only one looking at it, well, proofreading probably won't matter so much, right? And again, playtesting is probably something that's going to happen at your table with your players as you play the game. You're like, oh, this is working or this isn't working. You're going to fix it. And that leads right to being willing to adjust. And as the GM, when you're doing homebrew stuff and you're introduced it into the game, you have to have a discussion with your players. Be like, look, this stuff is not set in stone yet. We're gonna play with it. We'll see what happens. It might change, and you and your players might have to discuss what that means for your game.
So when I create monsters, I'm always fiddling and fussing with things. But it's not like I create a monster, it's set in stone, and it's like, well, all right, well, the players are 10th level, I want to make something that's a challenge 10, and that's just what it's going to be. And if it gets wrecked or wrecks them, I'm not going to be like, well, this is what I made, so this is what it should be. Like, you have to take the feedback of the game itself, and the challenge system is so messed up as it is that it's sometimes hard to find what it really should be.
It's definitely, like Dave says, a lot more art than science with the challenge rating system. And going along with monsters, we have fast and dirty monsters. Well, the whole idea is to be fast with it. So we don't say, oh, well, how is this super balanced compared to these other creatures? No, it's like we want to play these two themes of monsters together, bam, or we want this monster with this power and just go with it, not sit there and write up a whole monster excerpt, for it.
Yeah, I like to actually, if I start off with something that's already created and I fiddle with it, then I've got, a couple number swing of where I think it should be, a couple down or a couple up, and, I'm good to go with that. Whereas there's other times where I've made a monster whole cloth, improv at the table, and I'm coming up with bonus, whatever the bonus to my die roll is, right then and there, and I'm like, you know what?
What's your armor class? Yeah, that's what the bonus is.
Yeah, he just hit you.
Well, I mean, I usually try to gauge that off of what I think the monster's, stat would be and what the appropriate proficiency modifier. But if I'm making saving throws or that kind of stuff, then it's like, all right, well, would this monster have that? What kind of stat would it be? So it's always, a challenge to do that on the fly.
So you're setting a challenge rating, and then you're saying, well, what theme do I want behind this, and what do I want it to do? So one of the things he talks about is focusing on theme, and I think that's a big deal because when you create something, you kind of there's this desire to kind of want to make it do all of the thing, rather than be within a boundary for its what's CR level, as well as what did you initially have as what it should be doing. So
well, that's holds true for whether you're talking about a monster, a race, a class, and that kind of bleeds into stay in your lane, right? Mm-hmm. So is this thing doing what it's supposed to do, or is it like all things to all people?
Right.
And that's definitely a danger. And a lot of things too, like for the homebrew stuff, you have to think about, well, what is the purpose of your homebrew? What are you doing with it? Like you said, if you're putting on the GM's Guild, that's going to require a different level of attention than I'm just playing it in my game. Also, like when we make up monsters, how often do those monsters reappear, right? Mm-hmm. So if it's a monster that's going to appear over and over again, then we actually probably want to put it to pencil or ink and have it somewhere. But a lot of times in my games, I'm using monsters on the fly, and I'll go, this is my template, picking a monster from the monster manual, and I might add things from another monster or change things up a little bit. And then with description and things like that, I completely change the monster. But for that case, like in that case with that homebrew, do I need to play test it? Do I need to collaborate? No, I just throw it in my game. My players have fun with it. And if I think it's something that's going to reoccur, come up again, then, I might want to stat it out and write it up somewhere.
Right. So when you're working on, let's say, class archetypes, I don't have any real experience on building classes, but we've played around with, some archetype ideas. And I've always found that, whether, the races and archetypes that I've worked on, I've always found that if I template it towards one of the weaker versions, like half orc is a pretty solid choice. It's not overpowered in like, dwarf or elf. So that's a good one that I gear towards, and I'd be able to say, okay, well, that's going to give the bonuses, it's going to give an ability, it's going to give a skill. What else does it need? And I can then gauge how it holds up to other races. But I would much rather start off with something weaker and say, well, people are going to choose this because of theme, because they enjoy playing what it is, rather than the powers it gets. And then you can add to it if you really feel like it's underpowered.
That can bite you in the butt, though, doing the weakest one. For example, Sorcerer is really tough because there's only 2 in the PHB, and you've got the Dragon Sorcerer Origin and then the Wild Magic. And Wild Magic's a little hard to tap down on, like, how powerful it is. So when you have to gauge a Sorcerer homebrew against the Wild Magic, I kind of try and say, well, it's more powerful than the Wild Magic, but not as good as Dragon Sorcerer Origin, and that's kind of where I'd stick for something like Sorcerer.
Yeah, so you shoot for a medium. Well, I also find, like, with Ted's idea of going with the weaker, here's why I kind of agree with that, is because if you're playing in a game and that's like that's going to be your version of playtesting, what's going to happen is like those things are probably going to come out in the game, and if you go to your player and go, oh, you know what, I feel like, that this type, this archetype, this race would benefit from having this as well, and it would be thematic and it would work. For the most part, they're not going to be like, no, don't add that to my character.
I don't want any new abilities.
You know what I mean? But if you go the other way and go, you know what, this isn't working, this is a little too good, we got to take it away or change it, then someone might get a little butthurt.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it is always nicer to add stuff to your homebrew when somebody's playing it rather than take away.
So I do like when I see things that are rather conservative as well. Even like in the Unearthed Arcana and stuff like that, when there was definitely some ones where they went more conservative until they started pushing the boundaries later, going, no, I want to really stress test some things and get some feedback.
Yeah, I want to know how much they're going to reply if I make something too powerful. Yeah. Well, I also had that problem when I was doing looking at Warforged. I felt like Warforged was pretty underpowered. And so I was making shard mines off of that. And I'm like, these are more powerful than Warforged, but I think kind of Warforged and the Unearthed Arcana right now are kind of lame.
Well, funny story. They actually that was like one of the early Unearthed Arcanas, and it was developed before 5th edition was done.
Oh, well, I did not know that. That's interesting insight.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even like, that makes a lot of sense.
So they were still figuring out things. So the collab thing, like this is a great one. Now maybe there's different ways to collab, and online is tons. There's Facebook groups. There's different communities you can plug into. I mean, Nerdarchy has its own community that Nigel points out. But even just your gaming table, right? Is that you can collab there. You guys can work together to get DM and player perspective, and really build things together that everyone at the table is going to be proud of and enjoy.
And you never know what kind of group actually exists at your local gaming shop. You could reach out and be like, hey, look, I want another GM's perspective on this. And chances are, if you're buying your gaming books or your minis and dice from somewhere, then somebody else is as well. And you could reach out. Beyond making a new friend, you might get some advice on what you're working on.
So before we wrap this video up, how about we each throw out like one of our own homebrew tips for people who are looking to homebrew stuff. Homebrew for me, and the reason why I like doing it is because as a GM, as a player, I actually this is my creative outlet, and I like to make things my own. So that's what you should be trying to do with your homebrew. It's not about making things weaker or stronger. It's about putting your spin on it and adding your flavor, your theme to the game, and figuring out what that is. Now that's going to be a very personal choice for everyone.
Now I look at it in a way that there's sometimes when you game with veteran players, as thankfully or fortunately we actually have the ability to do. There's times that I want a surprise. I want to put something down on the table, a description that my players have no idea what it could possibly be. So there is not any chance of metagaming, and you still get to have that shock factor of, okay, well, it did what? So when I create monsters, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to keep that this is something new that they're facing alive when you've got people who have been gaming for 20, 30 years. So
yeah, keeping it fantastical for your players, and I think the veterans actually appreciate that.
So my favorite thing about homebrew and what I enjoy about it is after creating so much stuff for Patreon and writing so much stuff the 20 years previously of me gaming, it's like a mini game for the game. You're basically creating something out of your mind and saying, all right, how can I fit this in the rule and make it look legit? So that people aren't going to be like, oh, that's ridiculous, or that's the weakest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm never going to touch it.
So you're saying you like the challenge of creating stuff that you feel is equal to the designers of D&D.
Yeah, it's like not too hot, not too cold, not too uber, not too ridiculously weak, and a challenge based on what the system I see before.
You want to hit that target.
Yeah, it's hitting the target.
Nate wants mental stimulation. So the question is, guys, why do you like homebrewing? We got a place for that down in the comments below. Let us know what you think while you're at it. Like, share, and subscribe.
You can patronize us in a good way over on Patreon.
You can follow us on Instagram.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.